welcome to all of you all. I'm going to take a minute to set context to this session. Motives, manifest, traditions. Are you trying to, it's shocking. Maybe I can just take a mic.
I think it's the live wires on the stage.
Yeah. The live wires on the stage. Motives, design, patterns, emblems, when expressed through the medium of embroidery, weaving, art, and myriad other designs, are the creative expressions which are sort of society's markers for cultural identity, aesthetics, and beliefs. The visual imagery in the design and the motives sort of hold together a million human histories, stories, and aspirations. Our three panelists, Laila Tyabji, Pavithra Muddaya, and Gautam Kotamraju, in their individual fields, have had a long innings at the intersection of design, motives, and art. Together, we will deliberate on this topic to take the session forward. But foremost, if I may, with the panelists, as a community, I think we should give a round of applause. This year, Pavithra Muddaya's Vimor celebrates 50 years of staying in textile and in tradition. So it's a stellar panel. So foremost, Pavithra, if I could ask you to strike the opening notes. We are in Karnataka, and the textile tradition and the weaving is somewhere you have invested your time, effort. Give us a sense of the lay of the land in terms of the design and the motives. What are timeless? And since we are in Bangalore, do speak about the emblem, which is the Ganda Berunda, which is also a part of the BLF.
Thanks, Sadhana. I think it's an apt question because the emblem in BLF is the Ganda Berunda. It's a fascinating story to understand that the Ganda Berunda is the insignia, the Karnataka emblem. We think it has come down from the Wadiyars. But it has a long history, and I think what is fascinating is it's a mythical bird found across oceans and lands. So if we think we have Ganda Berunda, it's also a Russian emblem. Okay, the earliest bird that they have found is in Iran, in Jiroft. That is 3,000 or some thousand years behind. Then it was there in the Byzantine era. As I said, Russia, Greek, Roman, every place had this bird. What was so special about the bird, and what we have to understand is it was mythical. How did somebody's brain across the oceans and across where we are celebrate something and have something in common? We're not trying to look at where it came from first and where it landed up and how it was used. But I think it's relevant to understand that there was so much of celebration of a give and take and assimilation, integration, so that everyone could prosper, use it, without saying this is mine and my IP and this belongs only to me. I think it talks of a time when everyone freely gave, freely created, and I think that is the beauty of textiles, because in any textile, I've got a small little museum called the Vimor Museum. In any textile, I say celebrate what is common, commonality, instead of what is different. And every textile, you would see two common elements. So, we grow up thinking, oh, this belongs to my region, this belongs to my community. And when we see textiles that are shared right across borders, I think it looks at the larger context, and I think especially in today's time, it's very relevant to say, you and me have something in common. And if we are celebrating what is common, we don't need to be violent. And I think it's a great way forward. I mean, there are a lot of motives, but I think I'll let them talk about it.
Okay, we'll hold the thought. We'll come back to the timelessness. Laila, for decades, you worked with diverse, different communities. Particularly in this reference, it's embroidery. Embroidery has been a language, has been an alphabet, and a language for women of these communities. Do etch us that canvas. How did this work sort of unfold?
Well, I always feel so fortunate that I work with craftspeople all over India in at least 25 of the states in India, and with over now 760 crafts communities in these states. So one learns a lot about them and how they express themselves. And I think that we should recognize that they have a language which is as powerful and significant as the one in which you and I are talking today. Some years ago, I was doing a design workshop in Banaskantha with Ahir embroidery women. And two young volunteers from an NGO in the UK came on a study tour. And the first half of the day, they were quite impressed at how these women were interacting, and how when we were giving them the designs for the kurtas that we were designing, and they were able to name the different stitches, the different motives and designs, and remember that they had to put this here and that there in this color and that color. But when we were having lunch, somehow or the other this came out that these women didn't know how to read and write. And they were shocked, horror. And they said, but you know, you're working and you're a development agency, and how is it that you haven't taught them how to read and write? So I said, actually they do, but they do it with their needles. And they have a very powerful language, and they have names for everything that they do, and they express themselves through this. And every piece that they embroider actually tells a story which is very powerful. But they still felt that somehow these women were missing out on something very important. And I said, at the moment, living in rural communities in the desert of Kutch, they don't actually need to learn how to read and write. When they do, they will definitely learn it, and they'll realize that a pencil or pen is less complex than handling a needle. And sure enough, those same women with whom we work today come to Daskar bazaars and make their own bills and write their own accounts and have their own bank accounts secret from their husbands. But everything is there in its space. And I think that all of us urbanized, educated, so-called educated people need to learn to understand that the skills and languages which craftspeople have are quite as powerful and as expressive as our own.
That is so very true in terms of the myriad layers of which they express themselves with motives, particularly, even they sort of predicted the tsunami through their embroidery patterns, Pivoting to you, Gautam, at a fundamental level, being the pioneering batch from Mumbai's National Institute of Fashion Technology, and then segueing to at an industry level. What has your frames of reference been? What have the lens been when you've looked at design, art, motives, patterns?
Thank you. First of all, I'm in absolute awe of the people on the stage. Some of them, Laila here, I've read about when I was a student when I had less white hair. So pardon any faux pas that I might, and I can't promise not to commit any, right? A bit of a fanboy moment here. But, pioneering batch of NIFT. Now, NIFT was set up by the Ministry of Textiles to supply the then export industry with skilled workforce and labor force. So yes, of course, there was a gamut of technical courses, but there was also the fact that they didn't lose sight of our heritage and the rich tapestry of this land, and I'm going to say arts, crafts, and cultures in plural, because the variety that we have, I think it can't be surpassed by any other country, and they kind of integrated that into what was usually a technical course in three very impactful ways. So they packed us off to do something called craft documentation to some usually very remote part of the country. Like we took 2 days in a train, a day in a bus, and a day of walking to get to this village where we could kind of understand the gaddi, which is from remote Himachal, how they go about making felt wool, and how they make a song and dance about it, and how it's a part of the culture also. It's a craft and as well as an art, right? And then the history of fashion and the history of art, how were they interlinked? So for them to have woven that into the syllabus, right, kind of left some sort of an impact as I went about creating, conceptualizing, creating, launching, and scaling brands, which is what I do for a living. Somewhere that stayed with me, and I mean, I'll touch upon this maybe more sometime later, but to me, art and design are like the right and left hand. I mean, I'll touch upon this maybe a little later.
There is a document released by the Ministry of Culture which says that if India got its art and craft and handmade correct, we would not need to have any industry or manufacturing base. But I guess the report is getting some dust and it needs to be activated. Pivoting back to you, Laila, we spoke about this timelessness of the embroidery. How do the motifs pan out today? How does the community engage today? Has there been a creative reset, or is it a bit of tradition and innovation going hand in hand?
Well, both actually, and it always has been. I think we also need to rid ourselves of this idea that embroidery or any other craft, including handloom weaving or whatever, is static. It is a market-led activity in most cases, or at least societal, because people make them for use. They are functional products as well as decorative ones. And nothing has ever remained the same. It adapts and innovates according to the need. A Rabari woman, we look at, say, mirrorwork embroidery from Kutch, and we say, oh, mirrorwork embroidery from Kutch. If we're very, very sophisticated and savvy, we can say, okay, that's Rabari, and that's Garasya Jat, and this is Ahir. But actually, if you show a Rabari woman an embroidery, she can date it to within 5 years, depending on the kind of the use of colors, the way the peacocks and the flowers are portrayed, and how the stitches have changed. There is constant change and innovation. But yes, it is also a signature. You are wearing embroidery, I'm wearing embroidery, but the two couldn't be more different. And it is the signature and the language of the communities with whom those embroideries come. And I think it's very important not to lose those. You can change what you're saying with the embroidery. You can say it in a different way, just as we use alphabets and words when we're writing, and every writer has a different way of expressing themselves, and so do craftswomen, and so do the craftspeople in all the skills. And you can recognize that hand, and I think it's important to keep it. I feel a little concerned that so much embroidery now is being done with a printed khaka, and the craftspeople being told to very mechanically make it so that every piece is identical. I mean, that's not the charm of handcraft, and its importance and its significance and the way that it's superior to the industrial product is that every piece can be a little different, and we should value that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the bale and the buta, the pattern which has been there for centuries, when hand done organically, looks very different and rich, as opposed to the one that comes out of the kata. Yes, that's true. Gautam, you've had a shift in terms of what you're doing at industry and at a scale level. And now one of the foremost reasons is to take art to the people, and it should not be in a niche area. So share that endeavor and how has that journey been?
Sadhana, you're a well-known investor in art, right? But so you'd know this really well, what I'm going to say next, correct? It's usually the preserve of a few. It's accessed by even fewer, right? Whereas I believe art should be accessible to more people. And what we're doing is, there are two statements I'll make, and then maybe I'll elaborate on them in a while. So we say that we're operating at the confluence of art and design, and the second thing is we're on a mission to improve India's AQ. Since the second one is slightly briefer, I'll maybe touch upon that first. Now, I'm a 70s child, and when we were growing up, it was all about IQ, SAT scores and everything else. With the advent of big organizations in India, EQ became really important: empathy, emotional quotient, and well-being of employees and everything. And I think as India has emerged out of being a developing or a third world country and into a superpower almost today, right? India's upgrading. After IQ and EQ, I think it's AQ, which is important, right? AQ could be art quotient, could be aesthetic quotient. Take your pick, right? Now going back to the art and design. Now art is intuitive, design is iterative. Art is more subjective than design, because art could be priceless for one, useless for somebody else, whereas design has to have a product at the end and it has to be well priced. Right? There's only one measure to it, so therefore it's less subjective. What we're trying to do is take art out of, let's say, museums. When I say out, we're not stealing it, we're genuinely licensing it, authentically licensing it, putting it on very well-designed products, and trying to place it on a customer's journey as to take it beyond the four walls of a museum where the footfalls, in a country with declining footfalls, right? There's some great effort being made by the likes of MAP, KNMA, and a few others, but nonetheless, it's still low footfall. So how do I make products that are culturally more significant, and just touching upon that, in a country where art form is bigger than the artist, we're trying to put the artist back at the narrative, center of the narrative. For example, most of us know Varli art here, right? What we don't know is there's a gentleman called Jivya Soma Maharshe who took Varli from the wall to a canvas and popularized it, right? Ganga Devi played a similar role in Madhubani, popularizing Madhubani, right? And Jangad Singh Sham did the same with the Gond art. Right? Most of us don't know these three names that we've spoken about. After M.F. Hussain, maybe a few other Navaratnas, we kind of tend to lose our way around that, right? So these names need to be back at the center of the public discourse on not just art, right? Because that's, again, a smaller population, but a larger, population should kind of speak about or know about these artists and their contribution to shaping the world around us, including India as we know it today. So, AQ really is the new thing.
So that's a journey I think Pavithra, Laila have started.
Exactly, and that's why I'm in fanboy moment.
The next generation seems to continue it with a time signature of these times. Reverting back to you, Pavithra, do give us your stories from the loom. There is a popular story that you mentioned about subsidies from the government in terms of they don't know the difference between handloom and loom and power loom.
You're putting me into a tight spot.
Okay, we won't.
Okay, anyway.
But that's your, give us your stories from the loom, in terms of raw material, stone, texture, where the change has happened. Yet there are villages in Karnataka which are doing that same shawl because it's what they consume and it's what they give to the god.
Yes. Okay, leaving alone subsidy, because I think both Laila and me can go on talking about this. Yeah, so, yeah, it's another session. But I think fabric and cloth is something that I think all of us, from the time you are born till the day you die, cloth is something that accompanies us all through our life. In different societies, I think practically in every part of the world, there is a lot of cultural association and influence of which god, what it is, why the systems are there, why are you doing this cloth. One thing we have to understand before a weaver starts weaving, he first prays. He prays that what he weaves will be a good piece and the wearer will benefit. And he's thankful and he's grateful to his God, whichever it is, for giving him the skills. Weaving is a pure mathematical skill. It's purely science and maths. Okay, and yet they're, like Laila says, they're unlettered, but they're geniuses, and that's something that we need to learn from them. There are a lot of stories like what you say. I've been working with the shepherding community. I think that's what you're implying. So they are sheep herders in North Karnataka, the Kurba community. And I was just fascinated there because the kind of loom they have is not like our regular loom. It's something closer to the northeast loom. And it takes up so little space. The warping is done outside. It just takes a little space in the house, unlike the regular pit looms that we have seen. And there is no chemical and there is no machine in the entire village. They've been making these black kamblies for centuries, and they've never commercialized it because they think no function goes without that, whether it's a marriage or a death. What is fascinating is even the tamarind seeds is used instead of glue, and the loom is at an angle like what we talk of Patan Patola. I mean, warping is like that. So everything is used from end to end. So they walk the sheep, enrich the farmers' agricultural land, they shear the sheep, use that to make blankets and then offer it to Shiva. They call the god Bireshwara. So, I mean, they have beautiful stories of how the sheep came out of Shiva's curly locks, you know, and I mean, the stories are fascinating, and what is beautiful is they have never thought that they're doing something sustainable. They never use the sheep's milk till the calf is 22 days old. Okay, and after that, they make buttermilk and keep it for any visitor, or any traveler, and keep it outside the house, make buttermilk. So at night, when there is still more buttermilk, they dig a hole and put it back. Now, when we talk on sustainability, this is the same thing. We put it back into the earth. So there is such a respect that they look at man, animal, and nature. And I found that fascinating. It's not only this community, almost all the weavers have some kind of a history and a story that they will pray, and then they think they can handle any kind of weaving. Other thing I'd like to say is if you know ABC, you can write prose and poetry. So if you know weaving, you can do a jamdani or you can do any technique. So this is also very important because when you're commercially, you have a support system, it'll continue. If there is no demand, then it dies a natural death. Now, how many of you knew there was ikat in Karnataka? There was. So, but it's lost. If you don't need it, why will I continue producing it? And I've seen jamdani even in Karnataka, but it's not a big market because if there was no demand, it dies. So actually a weaver can take on any kind of weaving. It's not that I only know this or only know that. That's something I'd like to say. And it also is fabulous because, they have little stories about how the Deccan wool is so coarse. And they told me that we don't need to go to the gym because we walk our sheep. And the sheep hair, sort of itchy. So that's like, they call it like acupuncture. But they have different stories. But every area has different stories, and it's fascinating.
So, what all three of you have shared in terms of the cultural design heritage that we have, it should be a very easy crossover to commerce. And that's the elephant in the room. So you do have states like Orissa where it is mandatory for the uniform to be made by the fabric with what weavers produce. So of course, looking for economic patterns, we can look at design motives, but to look for economic patterns is like really trying to look for a pattern of surety in choppy seas. But since you're the youngest here, Gautam, address how do you straddle creativity and commerce in an area which is a heritage, it is beyond price, its value.
Yes. Yep. Thanks. I think it's one of the most important questions, really, that for anybody involved with arts and design and culture and preserving it, thanks for asking this question, because I didn't know, for example, about the Orissa example. What I do know is elsewhere in the world, right, it's a flywheel effect. Right, so consumerism fuels interest in our culture, and culture fuels drives it back into consumerism at some level or the other. I don't want to make it sound negative though. I'll give you two examples. One from the West, one from the East. Museum of Modern Art, and on the East is the Beijing Palace Museum. Right, they've both commercialized. Then they shifted their focus from an exit through the gift shop. It's a beautiful little film. If you ever get a chance, please do watch it. Exit through the gift shop kind of an approach, which means more souvenirs, and keeping merchandising as a means to sustain an art institution or a museum, to placing it at the center of the general consumer discourse, correct? Which means they have put it out there. There are more people who know what lies in the museum, because on every product you say it's from this place, and you want to go see that painting that inspired this, go back to that museum. So it actually also drives footfalls, at the same time bringing revenue back to the museum. I think there's a need to shift it from souvenirs, collectibles, keychains, to something a little more maybe functional,
Deeper.
with some products that you interact with on a daily basis, and something that you can step back and look at and say, hey, does it need to be as functional or and with no thought, or could it do with some, I'll just drift a little tangent into the Kochi airport. You approach any of the Bangalore airport and everything, beautiful. Yes, Mumbai has done a great job in bringing art alive, but it's the architecture of the Kochi airport preserving that local, which is a part of their culture.
It was the first private airport.
Exactly. So it's more than just spectatorship. I think you said this sometime in the morning and some other conversation about participation in preservation than spectatorship of conservation. To me, I think that's the future, and they've already shown, both MoMA and the likes of MoMA and Beijing Palace Museum, that hundreds of millions of dollars is waiting to be made, and that can only be made on the back of a larger public participation, right? In this, correct, and taking pride in where we're coming from.
Laila? I won't repeat the question
Yeah.
in interest of time.
I think it's all about awareness. Craftspeople live in small communities in quite distant, remote, often rural areas. And people, their potential customers and consumers, live in urban cities. There's very little interaction between the two. Somehow, there has to be more knowledge of each other and of the skills and products that are there, waiting to find a market. Today, wandering around this extraordinary festival, I saw so many people wearing ikat. They were wearing ikat saris, they were wearing ikat shirts, even the men were wearing ikat bush shirts, they were skirts, but do you know that we might not have had ikat today, Andhra Pochampalli ikat, if Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay had not been on a tour, a political tour. At that time, she was actually not working in the craft sector, and this is pre-independence. And someone told her about a few families of weavers in a village in what was then Andhra, now Telangana, and that they were planning to give up weaving and take up some other occupation. She immediately got back into her jeep. It was May, it was burning hot in this open jeep, and everyone was trying to dissuade her, but she drove to Pochampalli. She saw the weavers. She gave them not only money to buy raw material, but she gave them an order for some quite basic fabric, but with ikat weave in it. And that was the beginning of this huge international success story of Indian ikat. So sometimes people have to go out of their comfort zones and go out to see what marvels there are in India and how we can use them. I'm not just talking in a kind of cultural, aesthetic, sort of dinosaur way, but to say that this is actually the wealth and power of India, which no other country in the world has, and we should be pushing this instead of trying to tuck it under the carpet and say that India should only march to industrialized tunes. I think this is so short-sighted, and I do look on all of you in this audience to say that this side of India, the handmade, the handcrafted side, is as important as the huge strides that we have made in digital and industrial successes.
Pavithra, I mean, the European Union today has said handmade and hand done has a economic value which is unsurpassable. And we in our country have, this is the largest, one of the largest sectors for working population. So,
Sorry, go ahead.
Not only that, but because we have so many living hands and skills, we can produce these things at a price that is competitive with the industrial product. I mean, today, a sort of sports shoe costs about, I think, 4 times as much as a handcrafted, hand-embroidered jutti. So, I mean, how lucky we are to be with our feet in both the East and the West in the 21st century and our past, and to be able to meld them together into making a dynamic and extraordinary society.
Okay, just, going on with what Laila said is perfect. I think we're very lucky to be in India. But I think the focus is when we've got 500 million hands or 250 million hands without jobs. I think the first thing that moves me is we have to create jobs with dignity. It's not just about any jobs sitting in a cubbyhole. I think that is important, that we have to create jobs with dignity, and handlooms is something that is surefire. We've already tested model when we had the highest income because of handlooms. I don't understand why our policies just don't look at these kind of things and then take on to just everything is mechanization, displaying so many hands. And handloom is something that can be taught. So it is, we can create employment, and it's irrespective of which area, what it is. Because, I think that is very important. Just a 2-minute thing, I'd like to tell you about, all of you must be owning a puja sari. My daughter will say I always talk about it, but this is an example I'd like to talk. As a small organization, the puja sari is something that I think a lot of them with the red checks and things, it's been in continuous production for 48 years, beyond my name, beyond my brand, because I don't believe in this IP and branding and things like that. So we did it, but like my weavers say, it's put so much food on the plate. It was a stepping stone for them to come up to such a level. Today, all of them can buy me out. There were 2 saris, that was a puja, and another thing is what you call the Chettinad checks. You'll see Kamala Devi in it very often, and she was very closely associated. She was very tough to me. But it's been in the market. There was no marketing. There was no nothing about it. And how is it, like, coming back to you, I think pure aesthetics, price points and things, that itself has a capacity to market it. Today's generation doesn't need to use it as a sari. They will convert it into something else. And so there's no limit to what the handloom can do. It can cater to different price points, different communities, different things internationally, and I think it's sad if we just lose track of it.
Well, thank you all 3 of you for those insightful thoughts. At the Bangalore Literature Festival, we tried to put this panel together to address the oral narrative of motives, design, and the intersections with market, with communities. Well, we've raised a few questions. We don't have all the answers, We live with the questions and try to seek the answers. In the words of poet Robert Frost, we have many miles to go. I have, it's showing on my monitor 5:49, so I'm in time. Can I ask 2-3 questions? All right. Show of hands.
Thank you so much to all the speakers. Again, it's been a fangirl moment right here because I adore both of the women. Coming to the question, I think Pavithra, Laila, and Mr. Gautam spoke about it. So in the context of climate change, if we have to decarbonize, the only alternative is handloom. And unfortunately, again, like Pavithra said, our policies and programs in the name of, in quoted, inverted commas, just transition is far from being just. So what is it that is needed to push the needle towards the handmade and the handloom sector? Thank you.
You can take it.
Thanks. I mean, this is a very sensitive topic, but it's close to my heart. As I said, one part is the government and the policy and things like that. But I think as consumers, I think the first thing as a consumer, we have to understand that we should stop bargaining. We don't have the courage to go and bargain at a MNC or a Louis Vuitton. But the minute we see a shirtless man or a man who can't talk English and who is not confident enough or at our social level, we think it's our right. And that is where policy comes. It's 75 years, we still say 20% discount. Why? So I have been fighting, saying 20% the consumer goes into an MNC, doesn't need it. Revert it back to the weaver. I don't know how long it is. It's a tragedy, but if the government does it, I think we should desist from bargaining from them, because after all, it's our own country, man. Why are we doing this instead of putting it into some other country's pocket? And I feel strongly because the weavers' suicide is so high. It's not about anything else and not, and the income level that they're talking of, the statistics is 5,000 a month, 6,000 a month. I mean, it's ridiculous. The man who digs the road gets much more under Menrega. So it's such an unequal society, and we are part of it. I think we can do our little bits also, Laila says, whenever I do a lot of revival and create designs, and so everything becomes your baby. So after you've had the thrill of it, then you say, okay, you stop it and go on to the next. But it's fascinating that after so many years, you see someone still using it or some weaver continuing. I think that gives you a great satisfaction. If I were to put one design part of it, I think it's the diamond pattern that can be used and manipulated in different ways. In certain places, we call it the peacock eye or the koel eye. But I've got saris from Cambodia. I mean, we've found it here, and it's there. It's right across. So how you interpret, they've taken this one diamond and elongated it, stretched it, made it quarter, half, any which way. So I think the creative brain can go any way with any kind of motive, and I think the fun is in creating it.
Nothing to match that.
Okay, so that's 52 seconds. Our timekeeper is very happy. It was a difficult topic.
We like Indigo. They always, whether they arrive late or not, they always say they arrived before time.
Well, thank you for engaging with us. Thank you for listening to us at this oral narrative tradition. Oh, 29 seconds. Can we ask? Yes. Go ahead with your question. Can someone give him the mic?
Who would get more money if the weaver sells the thing to the producer, who then sells it in the shop?
How old are you, may I ask?
11.
11, thank you. I think the industry is in safe hands.
Okay, one part of it I just like to say is in every industry, you have the so-called middleman. Middlemen are not necessarily bad. Okay, nobody who produces something sells it directly. It's only in the handmade industry that we tend to look down upon the person who connects the maker and the buyer. And actually, like in any other industry, if it's done with integrity and honesty, there's nothing wrong. Everyone who produces doesn't always have to sell. I mean, that's been the system, and I think it comes up to everyone else, how you run it, you know. Because definitely the weaver can't be selling, can't be weaving, can't be designing, and looking at huge wholesale. So I think it's okay because every industry has it, you know.